The story of social media does not begin with a dorm room in Cambridge or a garage in Silicon Valley. It begins in 1997 when a programmer named Andrew Weinreich launched a platform called 6degrees.com, named after the psychological theory that every human being on Earth is connected to every other through no more than 6 intermediate relationships. 6 Degrees allowed users to create profiles, list their friends, and browse connections, behaviors so ordinary today that they feel embedded in human nature itself. Yet at its inception, this was a radical reimagining of how identity could be performed and how relationships could be mapped in digital space. The platform attracted over 1 million registered users before it was shut down in 2001, a casualty not of bad ideas but of infrastructure that could not yet support the social hunger it had awakened. Weinreich later sold the company for approximately $125 million, a transaction that, in retrospect, may represent the most undervalued sale in the history of human communication technology. Before the modern social network existed as a commercial enterprise, the intellectual scaffolding for it was being quietly assembled in the corridors of academic psychology. In 1973, sociologist Mark Granovetter published a landmark paper titled The Strength of Weak Ties, in which he argued that the most powerful social connections are not the deep bonds between close friends but the fragile, casual links between acquaintances. This counterintuitive finding would become the silent architecture beneath every social platform ever built. Weak ties, Granovetter demonstrated, are the conduits through which new information, job opportunities, and cultural ideas travel fastest. When Facebook introduced the concept of friending someone you barely knew, or when Twitter made it possible to follow a stranger's thoughts in real time, these platforms were, whether consciously or not, operationalizing Granovetter's decades-old insight. The design of the social graph, the invisible map of human connection that every major platform maintains, is fundamentally a commercial exploitation of this sociological truth about the hidden power of peripheral relationships. The neurobiology of social approval was already well understood by evolutionary scientists long before any engineer thought to encode it into a clickable button. Human beings evolved within small tribal groups in which social acceptance was not a luxury but a survival mechanism. Being included meant access to food, protection, and reproduction. Being excluded could mean death. The brain's reward circuitry, centered on the nucleus accumbens and driven by the neurotransmitter dopamine, developed over hundreds of thousands of years to respond powerfully to signals of social inclusion. When another member of the tribe acknowledged you, smiled at you, or chose you for a task, dopamine was released, not in a steady stream, but in a sharp, unpredictable spike. This unpredictability is critical. Neuroscientists call it variable ratio reinforcement, and it is the same mechanism that makes slot machines so compulsively difficult to stop playing. The like button, introduced first by a platform called FriendFeed in 2007, was not merely a feature. It was a neurological trigger, translated into pixels. The platform that would ultimately weaponize the like button at civilizational scale was Facebook, but the button itself arrived on that platform only after significant internal debate. In 2009, Facebook engineer Andrew Bosworth and a team including Leah Pearlman and Justin Rosenstein were exploring ways to make positive expression on the platform simpler and faster. The original name under consideration was not like, but awesome, a word that carries considerably more exuberance and considerably less ambiguity. Executives worried that the button's meaning would be misunderstood, that users might click it beneath posts announcing grief or tragedy, generating social confusion. The concern was valid, prophetic even, as the exact scenario they feared has since become one of the defining awkward rituals of digital life. Nevertheless, the like button launched on February 9, 2009, and within months it was generating data of a kind that had never existed before in human history. A continuous, time-stamped, quantified record of human emotional approval attached to specific content produced by specific individuals at specific moments in time. The psychological concept most central to understanding the like button's power is a phenomenon described by behavioral psychologist B.F. Skinner in the 1930s and 1940s through a deceptively simple apparatus he called the operant conditioning chamber, now known colloquially as the Skinner box. Skinner demonstrated that behavior could be powerfully shaped not merely by reward and punishment, but by the timing and predictability of those rewards. When a rat pressed a lever and received food pellets at a fixed, predictable rate, it pressed steadily. When the reward came randomly, unpredictably, sometimes after one press, sometimes after 50, the rat pressed the lever obsessively, far more frequently than the fixed reward rat, and continued pressing even when rewards ceased entirely. Skinner called this variable ratio reinforcement, and it produces the most persistent, extinction-resistant behavior of any conditioning schedule he studied. The like button is a lever. The notification is a pellet. The engineers who designed these systems may or may not have read Skinner, but the mathematics of compulsion they created is indistinguishable from his laboratory findings. Between the closure of 6 Degrees in 2001 and the launch of Facebook in 2004, a remarkable ecosystem of experimental social platforms flourished in the cultural space of the early internet. Friendster, launched in 2002 by Jonathan Abrams, was among the first to achieve significant scale, eventually accumulating over 3 million users before a catastrophic combination of server failures and corporate mismanagement caused its slow collapse. What makes Friendster historically significant is not its success but its failure mode. The platform's servers literally could not handle the weight of human social desire. Pages took up to 40 seconds to load. Users, accustomed to the immediacy that digital technology promised, abandoned the platform in cascading waves of frustration. This technical limitation revealed something profound about the psychology of social media that would shape every subsequent platform design. The experience of social connection is exquisitely sensitive to latency. Even a few seconds of delay transforms anticipation into anxiety and anxiety into abandonment. Speed, it turned out, was not merely a technical consideration. It was an emotional one. MySpace, launched in August 2003 by Tom Anderson and Chris Dwulf in Santa Monica, California, introduced a principle that would recur throughout the history of digital social spaces: the dangerous power of personalization. Unlike Friendster, which maintains strict visual uniformity across all profiles, MySpace allowed users to modify the HTML and CSS of their own pages, embedding custom music, animated graphics, and wildly idiosyncratic color schemes. The result was a platform that looked, to anyone trained in design, like barely controlled chaos. Yet this chaos was the point. MySpace profiles were not merely pages, they were performances of identity, digital bedrooms in which teenagers especially could announce themselves to the world with a specificity and creative control that their physical environments rarely afforded them. The platform reached 100 million user accounts by August 2006 and was acquired by News Corporation for $580 million in 2005, a figure that at the time seemed astonishing and that would be made to look modest within a decade by the valuations to come. The acquisition of MySpace by Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation in 2005 stands as one of the most instructive cautionary tales in the history of media and technology convergence. Murdoch's organization, built on the principles of traditional broadcast media, centralized production, passive consumption, advertiser-driven content, fundamentally misunderstood what MySpace was and why its users loved it. Where News Corporation saw a distribution channel, users saw a community. Where executives saw an opportunity for advertising integration, teenagers saw their digital home being converted into a shopping mall. The imposition of corporate logic onto an organically grown social space accelerated precisely the kind of user exodus that the platform had been designed to prevent. By 2008, Facebook had overtaken MySpace in unique monthly visitors, and by 2011, News Corporation sold the platform for approximately $35 million, roughly 6% of what it had paid, in what many media analysts have described as one of the costliest corporate miscalculations of the digital era. LinkedIn, launched in May 2003 by Reid Hoffman and a founding team that included several alumni of PayPal, represents a distinct and underexamined branch of social media's evolutionary tree. Where other platforms pursued the informal, the personal, and the emotionally charged, LinkedIn colonized the professional register, the zone of the resume, the recommendation letter, and the business card. Yet beneath its formal vocabulary, LinkedIn operates on precisely the same psychological mechanisms as its more glamorous counterparts. The endorsement feature, introduced in 2012, functions as a professional analog of the like button, generating the same dopaminergic response while cloaking it in the language of career development. LinkedIn's genius, and the source of its remarkable durability in a landscape littered with failed platforms, was its ability to make professional anxiety, the fear of being overlooked, undervalued, or left behind in one's career, into a renewable source of engagement. Users return not primarily for pleasure but for the management of a kind of perpetual professional existential dread. The year 2004 represents a genuine inflection point in the history of human communication, not because of any single invention, but because of a convergence of cultural, economic, and technological conditions that made mass social networking not merely possible but inevitable. Broadband internet penetration in the United States crossed 50%. Digital cameras became cheap enough for widespread consumer adoption. A generation that had grown up with AOL Instant Messenger and early chat rooms was entering university campuses with sophisticated expectations about digital social life. Into this environment, Mark Zuckerberg launched the Facebook.com on February 4, 2004, initially restricting access to Harvard students. The platform spread to other Ivy League universities within weeks, then to universities broadly, then to high school students, then in September 2006 to anyone over 13 with a valid email address. This staged rollout, far from being merely a cautious technical strategy, was a brilliant exercise in manufactured exclusivity, the oldest psychological trick in the architecture of desire. The transition of Facebook from a university network to a global public utility was accompanied by a transformation in the nature of the data being collected that has received far less public attention than it deserves. In the early Facebook, users shared information about themselves voluntarily and consciously, their hometown, their interests, their relationship status. But as the platform evolved, a second layer of data generation emerged, one that required no deliberate act from the user at all. Every click, every pause, every scroll that lingered half a second longer on one image than another, every route taken through the platform's architecture, was recorded, time-stamped, and added to a behavioral profile of extraordinary granularity. This passive data, the data of attention rather than declaration, proved far more predictive of human behavior than any survey or questionnaire. It was the raw material from which the recommendation algorithms of the 21st century would be forged, and its collection had begun before most users had any conceptual framework for understanding what was being taken from them. The scholar who provided the most rigorous and disturbing conceptual framework for understanding what the major social platforms were doing with human behavioral data was Harvard Business School professor Shoshana Zuboff, whose 2019 book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, introduced a vocabulary that has since become essential to informed discourse about technology and power. Zuboff argued that the major digital platforms had discovered a new economic logic, distinct from industrial capitalism, in which human experience itself becomes raw material for the production of behavioral predictions that are bought and sold in newly invented markets. She called this logic surveillance capitalism, and traced its origins specifically to Google's decision in the early 2000s to repurpose the behavioral data generated by its search engine, data originally collected to improve search results, as the foundation of an advertising targeting system of unprecedented precision. The social media platforms that followed did not invent this logic. They inherited, refined, and vastly expanded it, turning the entirety of human social life into a continuously operating data extraction apparatus. Twitter was founded in March 2006 by Jack Dorsey, Noah Glass, Biz Stone, and Evan Williams, emerging from a brainstorming session at a podcasting company called Odeo that was facing an existential crisis following Apple's announcement of podcast support in iTunes. The original concept, attributed primarily to Dorsey, was described internally as a short burst of inconsequential information, a phrase of almost comedic underestimation given what the platform would become. The initial character limit of 140 was not arbitrary. It was derived from the 160-character limit of SMS text messages, with 20 characters reserved for the username. This technical constraint, far from being a limitation, became Twitter's defining cultural feature. The enforced brevity of the tweet created a new form of public rhetoric, compressed, aphoristic, frequently aggressive, and optimized for immediate emotional impact over nuanced argument. The haiku-like economy of the tweet would reshape political discourse, journalistic practice, and the very grammar of public intellectual life within a decade of the platform's launch. The concept of the attention economy, which provides the economic foundation beneath the entire social media edifice, was not invented by Silicon Valley engineers but by the Nobel Prize-winning economist and cognitive psychologist Herbert Simon, who articulated it in 1971. Simon observed that a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention, that as the supply of information increases, the scarce resource in any communication system shifts from content to the cognitive capacity to process it. In the digital age, attention became not merely scarce but enormously valuable as a commercial asset. Every minute a user spends on a platform represents advertising inventory. Every additional minute is additional revenue. The platforms therefore faced an engineering challenge that doubled as a psychological arms race: how to capture and retain human attention more completely, more continuously, and more compulsively than any competitor. The metric that operationalized this goal was called time on site, and its pursuit drove design decisions that would, over the following decades, reshape human cognition at a population scale. Instagram was founded in October 2010 by Kevin Systrom and Mike Krieger, and its design philosophy represented a significant departure from the text-heavy social environments that had preceded it. By centering the experience entirely on the filtered, aestheticized photographic image, Instagram tapped into visual processing systems in the human brain that are evolutionarily ancient, neurologically privileged, and cognitively automatic. The human visual cortex processes images approximately 60,000 times faster than text. Emotional responses to images are generated before conscious thought has time to intervene. Instagram's founders understood, with remarkable intuition, that the photograph, especially the aspirationally beautiful, carefully curated photograph, would generate social comparison, desire, and the particular form of pleasurable anxiety that drives compulsive return visits more effectively than any text-based platform could. The photographic filter, which allowed ordinary images to approximate the aesthetic quality of professional photography, was not merely a cosmetic feature. It was a democratization of the aspiration economy, a tool that invited every user to present themselves as an idealized version of their actual life. The acquisition of Instagram by Facebook in April 2012 for approximately $1 billion was, at the time, met with widespread astonishment and not a little mockery. The platform had 13 employees and no meaningful revenue. Its value lay entirely in its user base, its cultural cachet, and the behavioral data its users were generating at a rapidly accelerating pace. The acquisition revealed the strategic logic that would drive Facebook's behavior for the following decade: the systematic identification and absorption of any platform that threatened to attract the attention and behavioral data of young users away from the Facebook ecosystem. This logic, sometimes described as, if you can't beat them, buy them, was so consistently and aggressively applied that it would eventually form a central pillar of antitrust investigations conducted by regulatory bodies in the United States, the European Union, and the United Kingdom. The Instagram acquisition was not a business decision in the conventional sense. It was an act of ecological dominance, the behavior of an apex predator securing its territory. The psychological phenomenon of social comparison, first systematically described by psychologist Leon Festinger in his 1954 social comparison theory, is the engine that drives engagement on virtually every visual social media platform. Festinger proposed that human beings have a fundamental drive to evaluate their own opinions and abilities, and that in the absence of objective standards, they do so by comparing themselves to others. On Instagram, this mechanism operates in conditions of extraordinary imbalance. Users compare their unfiltered daily reality to the carefully selected, digitally enhanced, and aspirationally constructed presentations of others. The comparison is structurally unfair in the same way that comparing one's unedited manuscript to a published novel is unfair, but the emotional response it generates, inadequacy, envy, aspiration, and the compulsive desire to improve one's own presentation is entirely genuine. Research published in the Journal of Social and Clinical Psychology in 2018 demonstrated a direct causal relationship between Instagram use and increased levels of depression and loneliness, particularly among young women, findings that internal Facebook research had arrived at independently years earlier and chosen not to publish. Twitter was founded in March 2006 by Jack Dorsey, Noah Glass, Biz Stone, and Evan Williams, emerging from a brainstorming session at a podcasting company called Odeo that was facing an existential crisis following Apple's announcement of podcast support in iTunes. The original concept, attributed primarily to Dorsey, was described internally as a short burst of inconsequential information, a phrase of almost comedic underestimation given what the platform would become. The initial character limit of 140 was not arbitrary. It was derived from the 160-character limit of SMS text messages, with 20 characters reserved for the username. This technical constraint, far from being a limitation, became Twitter's defining cultural feature. The enforced brevity of the tweet created a new form of public rhetoric, compressed, aphoristic, frequently aggressive, and optimized for immediate emotional impact over nuanced argument. The haiku-like economy of the tweet would reshape political discourse, journalistic practice, and the very grammar of public intellectual life within a decade of the platform's launch. The concept of the attention economy, which provides the economic foundation beneath the entire social media edifice, was not invented by Silicon Valley engineers but by the Nobel Prize-winning economist and cognitive psychologist Herbert Simon, who articulated it in 1971. Simon observed that a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention, that as the supply of information increases, the scarce resource in any communication system shifts from content to the cognitive capacity to process it. In the digital age, attention became not merely scarce but enormously valuable as a commercial asset. Every minute a user spends on a platform represents advertising inventory. Every additional minute is additional revenue. The platforms therefore faced an engineering challenge that doubled as a psychological arms race: how to capture and retain human attention more completely, more continuously, and more compulsively than any competitor. The metric that operationalized this goal was called time on site, and its pursuit drove design decisions that would, over the following decades, reshape human cognition at a population scale. Instagram was founded in October 2010 by Kevin Systrom and Mike Krieger, and its design philosophy represented a significant departure from the text-heavy social environments that had preceded it. By centering the experience entirely on the filtered, aestheticized photographic image, Instagram tapped into visual processing systems in the human brain that are evolutionarily ancient, neurologically privileged, and cognitively automatic. The human visual cortex processes images approximately 60,000 times faster than text. Emotional responses to images are generated before conscious thought has time to intervene. Instagram's founders understood, with remarkable intuition, that the photograph, especially the aspirationally beautiful, carefully curated photograph, would generate social comparison, desire, and the particular form of pleasurable anxiety that drives compulsive return visits more effectively than any text-based platform could. The photographic filter, which allowed ordinary images to approximate the aesthetic quality of professional photography, was not merely a cosmetic feature. It was a democratization of the aspiration economy, a tool that invited every user to present themselves as an idealized version of their actual life. The acquisition of Instagram by Facebook in April 2012 for approximately $1 billion was, at the time, met with widespread astonishment and not a little mockery. The platform had 13 employees and no meaningful revenue. Its value lay entirely in its user base, its cultural cachet, and the behavioral data its users were generating at a rapidly accelerating pace. The acquisition revealed the strategic logic that would drive Facebook's behavior for the following decade: the systematic identification and absorption of any platform that threatened to attract the attention and behavioral data of young users away from the Facebook ecosystem. This logic, sometimes described as, "if you can't beat them, buy them," was so consistently and aggressively applied that it would eventually form a central pillar of antitrust investigations conducted by regulatory bodies in the United States, the European Union, and the United Kingdom. The Instagram acquisition was not a business decision in the conventional sense, it was an act of ecological dominance, the behavior of an apex predator securing its territory. The psychological phenomenon of social comparison, first systematically described by psychologist Leon Festinger in his 1954 social comparison theory, is the engine that drives engagement on virtually every visual social media platform. Festinger proposed that human beings have a fundamental drive to evaluate their own opinions and abilities, and that in the absence of objective standards, they do so by comparing themselves to others. On Instagram, this mechanism operates in conditions of extraordinary imbalance. Users compare their unfiltered daily reality to the carefully selected, digitally enhanced, and aspirationally constructed presentations of others. The comparison is structurally unfair in the same way that comparing one's unedited manuscript to a published novel is unfair, but the emotional response it generates, inadequacy, envy, aspiration, and the compulsive desire to improve one's own presentation, is entirely genuine. Research published in the Journal of Social and Clinical Psychology in 2018 demonstrated a direct causal relationship between Instagram use and increased levels of depression and loneliness, particularly among young women, findings that internal Facebook research had arrived at independently years earlier and chosen not to publish. YouTube, launched in February 2005 by Chad Hurley, Steve Chen, and Jawed Karim, 3 former PayPal employees, and acquired by Google for $1.65 billion in stock in October 2006, became the proving ground for one of the most consequential and least examined algorithms in the history of media, the recommendation engine. Initially, YouTube's recommendation system optimized for clicks, a metric that rewarded sensational thumbnails and misleading titles over genuine quality or user satisfaction. In 2012, following research demonstrating that this approach was producing a race to the bottom of tabloid content, YouTube shifted its optimization target from clicks to watch time. The consequences were enormous and not entirely anticipated. Content that was long, emotionally engaging, and capable of holding attention for extended periods was systematically promoted. Extremist content, conspiracy theories, and outrage-generating political material turned out to be extraordinarily well adapted to maximizing watch time. The algorithm did not intend to radicalize. It simply optimized for engagement, and radicalization was, it turned out, extraordinarily engaging. The radicalization pathway on YouTube was first documented systematically by researcher Guillaume Chaslot, a former YouTube engineer who left the company in 2013 and subsequently built a tool to track the recommendation chains the algorithm produced. Chaslot's research, published beginning in 2018, demonstrated that YouTube's recommendation algorithm consistently guided users from mainstream political content toward progressively more extreme material, regardless of the user's initial ideological starting point. A user watching a mainstream conservative video was likely to be recommended increasingly radical right-wing content. A user watching a mainstream liberal video was guided toward progressively more alarmist progressive material. The common denominator was not ideology but emotional intensity. The algorithm had learned that emotionally intense content held attention longer, and it promoted whatever content best served that goal without any capacity to evaluate the social consequences of the emotional states it was inducing. YouTube's parent company Google disputed Chaslot's methodology while simultaneously implementing changes to its recommendation system that validated his central claims. Reddit, launched in June 2005 by Steve Huffman and Alexis Ohanian as students at the University of Virginia, introduced a social architecture fundamentally different from the profile-centered platforms that dominated the landscape. Rather than organizing social space around individual identity, Reddit organized it around interest communities called subreddits, digital spaces dedicated to specific topics, cultures, and conversations. The platform's voting system, which used upvotes and downvotes to surface popular content and bury unpopular material, was presented as a form of democratic curation. In practice, It was a sophistication of the same psychological mechanism underlying the like button, with the additional feature of visible social punishment, the downvote, creating an environment in which the management of approval and disapproval became a constant social negotiation. Reddit's anonymous or pseudonymous culture created conditions distinctly different from Facebook's real identity model, enabling both remarkable candor and remarkable cruelty. The platform became simultaneously one of the most intellectually rich and most toxically hostile environments in the history of digital communication, often on the same day, in the same thread. The dead internet theory emerged as an informal hypothesis on online forums, particularly on 4chan and Reddit, approximately around 2019 to 2021, before gaining wider circulation in mainstream media. The theory proposes in its most expansive form that the majority of activity on the modern internet, the posts, the comments, the viral content, the apparent expressions of human opinion and enthusiasm, is not generated by human beings at all but by automated systems, bots, artificial intelligence programs, and coordinated inauthentic behavior networks operated by state actors, commercial entities, and anonymous bad actors. In its more moderate form, the theory suggests that while human activity still exists on the internet, it has been so thoroughly overwhelmed by algorithmic curation, bot-generated content, and artificially amplified signals that the experience of authentic human-to-human communication online has become increasingly rare, fragile, and difficult to distinguish from manufactured simulation. The theory is not merely paranoid fantasy, it draws on documented evidence of bot networks, troll farms, and artificial amplification campaigns that have been verified by academic researchers, intelligence agencies, and the platforms themselves. The documented evidence supporting the empirical core of the dead internet theory is substantial and comes from authoritative sources. A 2017 study by researchers at the University of Southern California estimated that between 9 and 15% of active Twitter accounts were in fact automated bots, a figure representing tens of millions of accounts generating content, spreading information, and participating in conversations without any human being involved. Facebook's own quarterly transparency reports have consistently acknowledged the existence of hundreds of millions of fake accounts on its platform, with the company reporting the removal of approximately 1.8 billion fake accounts in just the first quarter of 2019 alone. The internet security firm Imperva has estimated, in multiple annual reports, that bot traffic accounts for between 40 and 60% of all internet traffic in any given year, depending on the analytical methodology employed. These figures suggest that the social media experience, the sense of participating in a vast human conversation, is, to a degree that most users have never been invited to consider, a carefully maintained and partially synthetic illusion. The Internet Research Agency, a St. Petersburg-based organization funded by Russian oligarch Yevgeny Prigozhin and operating under the direction of Russian state intelligence services, represents perhaps the most extensively documented example of coordinated inauthentic behavior in the history of social media. The agency employed hundreds of individuals working in shifts to operate fake social media accounts across Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and Reddit, producing English-language content designed to inflame American social divisions on topics including race, immigration, religion, and electoral politics. The operation was active from approximately 2014 until its exposure in 2017 and 2018, during which period it reached an estimated 126 million Facebook users, generated 1.4 million Twitter interactions, and produced YouTube content that accumulated approximately 1.1 billion views. The Senate Intelligence Committee's bipartisan report on the operation concluded that it represented the most sophisticated foreign influence campaign ever mounted against American democratic institutions, and that its success was enabled, directly and knowingly, by the design architecture of the social media platforms it exploited. The psychological mechanism that made the Internet Research Agency's operations so devastatingly effective was not the sophistication of the content it produced. Much of it was crude, obvious, and identifiably manipulative to a careful observer, but the algorithmic amplification systems of the platforms on which it operated. The agency had learned what the platform's engagement algorithms rewarded: content that generated strong emotional responses, particularly anger, fear, and tribal indignation. By producing content precisely calibrated to these emotional frequencies, the agency's manufactured posts were amplified by Facebook's and Twitter's algorithms in exactly the same way as any other high-engagement content. The algorithm could not distinguish between genuine human outrage and manufactured synthetic outrage designed to simulate it. Both generated the same signal, high engagement, and both received the same algorithmic reward, broader distribution to larger audiences. The platform's systems had been designed with the assumption that engagement was a proxy for value. The agency demonstrated at nation-state scale that engagement was a proxy for nothing except emotional intensity. Cambridge Analytica, the now-defunct British political consulting firm, occupies a critical position in the history of surveillance capitalism's intersection with electoral democracy. Between 2014 and 2018, the firm harvested the personal data of approximately 87 million Facebook users without their knowledge or meaningful consent through a personality quiz application called This Is Your Digital Life, created by Cambridge University researcher Alexander Kogan. The app exploited a Facebook API feature that permitted apps to collect data not only about users who had installed them but about all of those users' Facebook friends, a design decision that Facebook had made to incentivize app development and which it had failed to adequately restrict or monitor. Cambridge Analytica used the harvested data to build psychographic profiles of American voters, claiming to have identified psychological vulnerabilities in specific demographic segments that could be exploited with precisely targeted political advertising. Whether the firm's psychographic targeting actually worked as advertised remains a matter of genuine academic dispute. What is not disputed is that 87 million people's private social data was taken and commercially weaponized without their knowledge. The psychographic model at the center of Cambridge Analytica's methodology was derived from a framework developed in academic psychology known as the Ocean Model, or the Big Five personality traits: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. A landmark 2013 paper by Michael Kosinski, David Stilwell, and Thor Greatpole at Cambridge University demonstrated that Facebook likes could be used to predict ocean scores with remarkable accuracy, that the pattern of what a person had liked on Facebook over time was sufficient to reconstruct a detailed psychological portrait of that person, in many cases more accurate than assessments provided by that person's own friends and family members. The paper demonstrated that 68 likes were sufficient to predict a user's sexual orientation with greater accuracy than a close friend. 150 likes exceeded the predictive accuracy of a parent. 300 likes could outperform a spouse. This research was not conducted secretly or maliciously, it was published in academic journals. But it made available to anyone with access to Facebook data a capability for psychological profiling that no previous technology in human history had made possible at scale. TikTok's emergence as a global social media phenomenon beginning approximately in 2018 and accelerating dramatically during the COVID-19 pandemic of 2020 represents a qualitative shift in the sophistication of social media's psychological engineering. Unlike its predecessors, TikTok, owned by Beijing-based technology company ByteDance, relies on a recommendation algorithm that requires almost no prior information about a user to begin making uncannily accurate predictions about their interests, desires, and emotional vulnerabilities. Where Facebook's news feed required years of explicit user activity to build a useful behavioral profile, TikTok's algorithm achieves equivalent personalization within the first hour of use by analyzing microbehavioral signals. The precise duration of each pause, the rewatching of specific seconds of video, the momentary hesitation before a swipe. This cold start capability, the ability to profile a new user almost immediately, represents a generational advance in behavioral prediction technology that has made TikTok's engagement metrics, by virtually every available measure, the most extreme ever recorded on a consumer social platform. The average time spent on TikTok by active users represents an extraordinary document of algorithmic power. In 2022, analytics firm Data.ai reported that American users spend an average of 95 minutes per day on TikTok, more time than they spent on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter combined. In some demographic segments, Particularly among users between the ages of 16 and 24, daily usage exceeded 2 hours. These figures are not merely interesting statistics about media consumption habits. They represent the measured outcome of a sustained technological assault on human cognitive sovereignty, the capacity to choose where one's attention goes, how long it stays, and when it returns. The architecture of the infinite scroll, combined with TikTok's recommendation algorithm's extraordinary sensitivity to microbehavioral signals, creates a content environment so precisely calibrated to individual psychological profiles that voluntary disengagement becomes genuinely difficult. Users consistently report intending to stop watching after 1 or 2 videos and finding themselves still scrolling 45 minutes later, a phenomenon that the platform's design team has extensively studied and deliberately optimized for. The infinite scroll, the design feature that eliminates pagination from social media feeds and replaces it with an endless, automatically loading stream of content, was invented by Asa Raskin in 2006 and has since become one of the most consequential and most regretted design decisions in the history of digital interface design. Raskin, who later became a prominent critic of addictive technology design and co-founded the Center for Humane Technology with former Google design ethicist Tristan Harris, has publicly stated that he estimates the infinite scroll causes approximately 200,000 additional hours of human time to be spent on social media every single day, time that would not have been spent had the natural stopping point of a page end remained in place. The design exploited a principle from behavioral economics: the elimination of decision points. Every time a user reaches the bottom of a page, they face a deliberate choice to continue or stop. The infinite scroll removes that choice architecture entirely, converting what should be a series of discrete decisions into a single, unbroken, effortless continuation that never requires the user to actively choose to keep going. The phenomenon of doom scrolling, the compulsive consumption of distressing news and negative content, particularly during periods of crisis, became a widely recognized cultural pathology during the COVID-19 pandemic, but its psychological roots are considerably older than the pandemic that named it. The negativity bias, a well-documented feature of human cognition in which negative stimuli receive greater attentional weight than equally intense positive stimuli, is an evolutionary adaptation that served survival purposes in ancestral environments where threats required immediate attention and response. In the social media environment, this ancient cognitive asymmetry is systematically exploited by content algorithms that have learned through billions of optimization cycles that negative, threatening, and alarming content generates greater engagement than content with neutral or positive valence. The result is an information ecosystem that presents human beings with a radically distorted sample of reality, one in which threats, disasters, and social hostility are vastly overrepresented relative to their actual frequency in the world, producing chronic states of low-grade anxiety that the platforms then soothe by providing more content. The concept of digital identity, the aggregated representation of a self in digital space, underwent a fundamental transformation between the early internet era of pseudonymity and the real-name social media era inaugurated by Facebook. In the 1990s and early 2000s, the dominant culture of the internet celebrated anonymity and pseudonymity as features rather than bugs. The famous New Yorker cartoon caption, "On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog," captured a cultural intuition that the internet represented a liberation from the social identities assigned by the physical world, an opportunity for self-reinvention, experimentation, and the expression of aspects of oneself that social convention suppressed. Facebook's insistence on authentic identity, its requirement that users register with their legal names and present a continuous, consistent, singular self, represented not merely a design decision but a political philosophy. It was a deliberate choice to colonize the internet's last frontier of self-invention and subject it to the same social accountability mechanisms that govern identity in the physical world. The psychological cost of Facebook's real identity model was analyzed with particular rigor by sociologist Erving Goffman, whose 1956 work, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, provided a framework that predated social media by decades but illuminated its consequences with uncanny precision. Goffman argued that human social life is fundamentally theatrical, that we all perform different versions of ourselves for different audiences in different contexts, a phenomenon he called impression management. We behave differently with our parents than with our colleagues, differently with our closest friends than with our professional acquaintances. This contextual flexibility of self-presentation is not dishonesty. It is a fundamental feature of healthy social cognition. Facebook's architecture collapsed these distinct social contexts into a single undifferentiated audience, what Dana Boyd famously called context collapse, forcing users to perform a single, unified self to all of the social worlds they inhabited simultaneously, an experience of social vertigo without historical precedent. WhatsApp, founded in 2009 by Jan Koum and Brian Acton, both former Yahoo engineers who had notably been rejected for jobs at Facebook, and acquired by Facebook for approximately $19 billion in February 2014, illuminates the global dimension of social media's expansion that American-centric narratives frequently underemphasize. While Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter dominated North American and European digital social life, WhatsApp became the primary communication infrastructure for billions of people in India, Brazil, Nigeria, Indonesia, and across the global south, regions where SMS messaging had never been universal and where WhatsApp's free, data-light messaging filled a communication void at scale. The platform's end-to-end encryption, introduced in 2016, made it simultaneously the most secure, widely used communication platform in the world and the least transparent. The combination of massive scale, private group architecture, and limited moderation capacity made WhatsApp a uniquely effective vector for the spread of misinformation and incitement, a dynamic with documented lethal consequences in India and Myanmar, where false rumors spread through WhatsApp group chains contributed to communal violence and ethnic persecution. The algorithmic amplification of misinformation represents one of the most extensively studied and most imperfectly understood phenomena in contemporary social science. A landmark 2018 study published in the journal Science by researchers Soroush Vasugi, Deb Roy, and Sinan Errol, analyzing every verified true and false piece of information shared on Twitter between 2006 and 2017, found that false news traveled significantly farther, faster, more deeply, and more broadly than true news across all categories of information. The study found that false political news was particularly virulent, spreading to significantly more people and reaching the same audience size as true news in approximately 1/6 the time. Crucially, the researchers found that this differential spread was driven primarily not by bots but by human users, who were more likely to share novel and emotionally provocative false information than accurate but less sensational true information. The algorithm amplified what humans found compelling, and humans, it turned out, found compelling falsehood more compelling than verifiable truth. The specific cognitive vulnerabilities that make human beings susceptible to misinformation in algorithmically curated environments have been studied extensively under the theoretical framework known as dual process theory, developed most influentially by psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky and popularized in Kahneman's 2011 book, Thinking, Fast and Slow. Kahneman distinguishes between System 1 thinking, fast, automatic, emotional, pattern matching, and largely unconscious, and System 2 thinking, slow, deliberate, analytical, and effortful. Social media environments are optimized for System 1 engagement. The fast scroll, the instant emotional reaction, the reflexive share or like. The speed and volume of information flowing through the social media feed, combined with the platform's constant introduction of new stimuli designed to capture attention, actively impedes System 2 engagement. The result is an information environment in which the cognitive tools required for critical evaluation, deliberation, fact-checking, source evaluation, and context-seeking are systematically disadvantaged relative to the fast, automatic responses that produce engagement and that the algorithms consequently reward. The history of social media's relationship with political advertising represents a transformation of democratic practice so rapid and so fundamental that the regulatory frameworks governing electoral communication, most of which were designed for the era of broadcast television, have been structurally incapable of keeping pace. In the 2012 United States presidential election, the Obama campaign's use of Facebook's custom audiences tool, which allowed advertisers to upload email lists and match them to Facebook user profiles for targeted advertising, represented a watershed moment in the application of behavioral data to political persuasion. By 2016, Facebook's political advertising infrastructure had evolved to the point where campaigns could target users based not merely on demographic characteristics but on inferred psychological states, recent behavioral patterns, and predicted emotional susceptibilities. The platform's lookalike audiences feature allowed a campaign to identify its most persuasible existing supporters and then find other users whose behavioral profiles most closely resembled them, a form of behavioral profiling that operates at a level of granularity and sophistication entirely invisible to the voters being targeted. The economic model that sustains the entire social media ecosystem, the trading of human attention for advertising revenue, contains a fundamental misalignment of incentives that several scholars have argued makes its most harmful consequences not accidental but structurally inevitable. When a platform's revenue is generated by selling advertisers access to user attention, the platform's financial interest is identical with the maximization of that attention. When research demonstrates that emotional arousal, social comparison, outrage, and anxiety are among the most attention-maximizing states the platform can induce, the platform's financial interest becomes identical with the maximization of those psychological states. There is no market mechanism that corrects for this misalignment, because the harms it produces, increased anxiety, diminished democratic discourse, epistemic fragmentation, are externalities that fall on society rather than on the platform's shareholders. This is not a criticism of the individuals who built these systems. It is a structural analysis of the economic logic under which they operate, a logic that makes benign outcomes unlikely in the absence of external regulatory intervention. The concept of the filter bubble, introduced by internet activist Eli Pariser in his 2011 book of the same name, describes the algorithmically generated information environment in which each user is progressively exposed only to content that confirms and reinforces their existing beliefs, interests, and biases, producing a condition of epistemic isolation that Pariser argued posed fundamental dangers to democratic society. Pariser observed that Google's search results had begun personalizing to individual users as early as 2009, such that the same search query produced different results for different people based on their browsing history and behavioral profile. As the major social platforms adopted and refined this approach, the news and information reaching each user became increasingly determined not by journalistic judgment or civic importance but by predicted personal preference. The filter bubble hypothesis has been the subject of significant academic debate, with some researchers arguing that its effects are more limited than Pariser claimed. The debate, however, largely concerns the magnitude of the effect. The existence of algorithmic personalization as an epistemically distorting force is not seriously disputed. Algorithmic governance, the use of automated systems to make decisions about what content is permitted, amplified, or suppressed on social media platforms, operates at a scale and speed that is entirely without precedent in the history of media regulation. Facebook's content moderation system processes approximately 100 billion pieces of content per day, a volume that no human workforce, regardless of its size, could review in anything approaching real time. The company employs tens of thousands of human content moderators, primarily in the Philippines, India, and Kenya, a global outsourcing of the most psychologically traumatic work in the digital economy, as these workers are required to review a continuous stream of the most violent, sexually abusive, and dehumanizing content that exists on the platform before it can be removed. The mental health consequences of this work have been the subject of increasing journalistic and legal scrutiny, with former content moderators describing symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder following their exposure to material that the platform's automated systems flagged for human review. The automation of content moderation using artificial intelligence systems trained on vast datasets of previously moderated content has introduced a new class of problems that the field of AI ethics is only beginning to systematically address. AI moderation systems, trained primarily on English language data and optimized for Western cultural contexts, have demonstrated systematic failures in identifying hate speech, incitement, and harassment in languages spoken by populations in the Global South, including Arabic, Amharic, and Burmese. This asymmetry has had consequences documented to be fatal. In Myanmar, Facebook's AI systems failed to identify and remove Burmese language posts calling for violence against the Rohingya Muslim minority in the years leading up to the 2017 genocide, a period during which Facebook was the primary internet experience for a majority of Burmese citizens and during which the platform functioned as the principal amplification mechanism for genocidal propaganda. A United Nations fact-finding mission concluded that Facebook had played a determining role in the spread of hatred that contributed to the atrocities. The gig economy of content creation, the ecosystem of influencers, creators, and professional social media personalities who earn their living by generating the content that feeds the platform's engagement machines, represents a novel form of economic organization that blurs the boundaries between self-expression, labor, and marketing in ways that are psychologically complex and socially underexamined. The YouTube Partner Program, launched in 2007, was among the first mechanisms that allowed ordinary individuals to generate meaningful revenue from their content creation. By the 2010s, a full-blown creator economy had emerged, in which millions of individuals worldwide were devoting significant portions of their time and emotional labor to producing content calibrated to the preferences of both their audiences and the algorithms that determined the reach of their work. The creator's relationship to the algorithm is structurally similar to the employee's relationship to the employer, with the crucial difference that the terms of employment are entirely opaque, subject to change without notice, and enforced by automated systems incapable of either negotiation or explanation. The psychological burden carried by professional social media creators, the individuals who build livelihoods on platforms like YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, has been documented with increasing frequency and concern in journalism, clinical psychology, and creator communities themselves. This burden has several distinct dimensions. The pressure of constant content production, which collapses the boundary between work and personal life. The anxiety of platform dependence, in which one's income is subject to algorithmic decisions that can drastically reduce a creator's reach overnight and without explanation. The corrosive effects of continuous quantified public evaluation, in which every piece of work receives an immediate numerical verdict in the form of view counts, engagement rates, and subscriber movements, and the specific psychological phenomenon of parasocial relationships, in which large audiences develop one-sided emotional attachments to creators that generate unrealistic expectations and, when those expectations are not met, intense expressions of betrayal and hostility. The creator economy, for all its democratic promise, has produced a new category of occupational psychological risk. Parasocial relationships, the one-sided emotional connections that media consumers form with media figures, were first described by sociologists Donald Horton and Richard Wall in a landmark 1956 paper, originally in the context of television and radio personalities. Horton and Wall observed that regular viewers developed genuine feelings of intimacy, affection, and personal connection with broadcast personalities they had never met and with whom no actual relationship existed. Social media has dramatically intensified this phenomenon by creating the illusion of direct, personal, reciprocal communication between creators and their audiences. When a YouTuber addresses the camera directly, speaks conversationally, shares personal struggles, and occasionally responds to comments, the parasocial architecture is engineered to be indistinguishable from the viewer's emotional perspective from a genuine friendship. The consequences of this illusion are complex. Parasocial relationships can provide genuine comfort and a sense of community to isolated individuals, while simultaneously substituting for the more reciprocal, demanding, and ultimately more sustaining connections of actual friendship. The history of social media's expansion into the commerce space, a trajectory from social network to marketplace, represents a deliberate and strategically significant evolution that blurs the already porous boundaries between social interaction and commercial transaction. Facebook's introduction of Marketplace in 2016, Instagram's shopping features beginning in 2019, and TikTok's aggressive development of integrated shopping capabilities beginning in 2021 all reflect the same strategic recognition. that a platform where users already spend extraordinary amounts of time in states of heightened social and aspirational engagement is ideally positioned to monetize those states through commerce. The integration of shopping into social media eliminates the friction traditionally associated with the retail transaction. The transition from browsing to buying now requires a single tap rather than a journey to a different website. Research in consumer psychology has long established that purchasing decisions are powerfully influenced by social proof, aspiration, and emotional state. The social commerce environment combines all three with unprecedented effectiveness, creating purchasing conditions that behavioral economists would recognize as deeply conducive to impulsive and suboptimal consumer decision-making. The rise of influencer marketing, the commercial practice of paying social media personalities to promote products to their audiences, has created a multi-billion-dollar industry that operates at the boundary between personal recommendation and commercial advertising in ways that regulators have found consistently difficult to govern. By 2022, the influencer marketing industry was estimated to be worth approximately $16 billion globally and growing rapidly. The effectiveness of influencer marketing rests on the parasocial architecture described by Horton and Wall. When an influencer recommends a product to an audience that has developed a sense of personal intimacy with that creator, the recommendation carries the psychological weight of a trusted friend's endorsement rather than the skepticism typically applied to conventional advertising. The Federal Trade Commission in the United States has required disclosure of paid promotional relationships since 2009. But the compliance rate among influencers has been chronically low, enforcement has been sporadic, and the disclosure conventions that have emerged, the barely visible #AD at the end of a caption, are widely understood to be insufficient to produce genuinely informed consumer decisions. The phenomenon of viral content, the rapid, exponential spread of a piece of content across social networks in a pattern analogous to biological contagion, has been studied extensively by network scientists, marketing professionals, and public health researchers. The analogy to disease transmission is not merely metaphorical. The mathematical models used to describe viral content spread are formally identical to epidemiological SIR models developed for infectious disease. Research by Jonah Berger at the Wharton School of Business, published in his 2013 book, Contagious, identified 6 attributes that reliably predict whether content will spread virally: social currency, content that makes sharers look good; triggers, content connected to frequent environmental cues; emotion, particularly high arousal emotions including awe, amusement, and anger; public visibility, practical value, and narrative. These attributes were identified through empirical analysis of what content spreads, and they were subsequently encoded, either explicitly or through the implicit optimization of engagement algorithms, into the design logic of every major social platform. The concept of dark patterns in digital design, user interface designs that are deliberately constructed to lead users toward actions they would not choose if the options were presented neutrally, has been extensively documented in social media platforms and the advertising technology ecosystem that surrounds them. Dark patterns in social media include default settings configured to maximize data sharing rather than user privacy, with privacy protective options buried under multiple menu layers, subscription cancellation flows designed to be as laborious and discouraging as possible, notification systems configured to generate anxiety about unread social activity in order to drive re-engagement, and cookie consent interfaces engineered to make the option to reject all tracking more difficult to select than the option to accept it. The study of dark patterns was systematized by UX researcher Harry Brignall, who began cataloging them in 2010 and has since identified dozens of distinct categories. The European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, implemented in 2018, explicitly prohibits certain dark patterns in data consent interfaces, though enforcement has been inconsistent. The smartphone revolution, inaugurated by Apple's introduction of the iPhone in June 2007, represents the single technological development most responsible for the transformation of social media from an important aspect of digital life into the dominant organizing principle of human daily experience. Before the smartphone, social media required the deliberate act of sitting down at a computer, opening a browser, and navigating to a platform. a sequence of intentional steps that created natural boundaries around social media use. The smartphone eliminated those boundaries entirely. The social media feed became permanently accessible, in the pocket, at every moment of waking life, including the most private and intimate moments. Bathroom, bedroom, dinner table, and child school recital all became sites of potential social media engagement. The average American now checks their smartphone approximately 96 times per day, once every 10 minutes during waking hours, a behavioral pattern that, if observed in any other context, would immediately be recognized as the signature of a significant compulsive disorder. The design of the smartphone notification system, the banner, the badge, the auditory alert, is one of the most powerful and underexamined attention capture mechanisms in the history of consumer technology. Notifications are engineered to exploit the orienting reflex, a fundamental feature of mammalian nervous systems in which any sudden, novel stimulus automatically redirects attention regardless of what the organism was previously attending to. The orienting reflex evolved to detect potentially important changes in the environment, the crack of a twig, the shadow of a predator, and it operates automatically, below the level of conscious intention. Social media notifications hijack this ancient neurological circuit and attach it to the platform's engagement loop. Each notification is a manufactured urgency, a signal that something potentially important has occurred in one's social world that requires immediate attention. Research has demonstrated that the mere awareness of an unread notification, even without reading it, is sufficient to significantly disrupt cognitive performance on tasks requiring focused attention, producing a measurable decline in effective working memory capacity. The sleep social media interface is among the most thoroughly documented and most systematically ignored harms in the literature on digital technology's physiological consequences. The blue spectrum light emitted by smartphone screens suppresses melatonin production, the neurochemical that regulates circadian sleep rhythms, through a well-established photobiological mechanism involving specialized photoreceptors in the retina called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, which are particularly sensitive to short-wavelength blue light. But beyond the photobiological mechanism, the social media content itself contributes to sleep disruption through a purely psychological pathway: the emotional arousal generated by social media engagement, the anxiety of FOMO, the cortisol response to negative content, the dopaminergic excitement of social approval, activates the sympathetic nervous system in ways that are physiologically incompatible with the parasympathetic state required for sleep onset. Research published in the journal Preventive Medicine Reports found that heavy social media use was associated with a 70% increased likelihood of reporting sleep disturbance, a finding replicated across multiple independent studies and age groups. The developmental psychology of adolescent social media use has become one of the most contested and consequential areas of contemporary social science research. Psychologist Jean Twenge's analysis of generational survey data, published in her 2017 book, iGen, identified a striking temporal correlation between the widespread adoption of smartphones and social media by American teenagers around 2012 and a statistically dramatic increase in rates of adolescent depression, anxiety, loneliness, and suicide ideation, particularly among girls. Twenge's interpretation of this correlation as evidence of causation has been both influential and controversial, with some researchers arguing that the magnitude of social media's contribution to adolescent mental health trends has been overstated and that other factors, economic precarity, academic pressure, and broader social changes, are at least equally implicated. The intensity of the academic debate, however, should not obscure the point of broad agreement that the unrestricted introduction of addictively designed social media products into the developmental environment of children and adolescents, without evidence of safety, represented a social experiment of extraordinary scale conducted without informed consent. Jonathan Haidt, social psychologist at New York University's Stern School of Business, has emerged as the most prominent public intellectual synthesizing the research on social media's developmental harms. His 2023 book, The Anxious Generation, argues that the simultaneous rise of smartphone-mediated social media and the decline of unsupervised, free-form childhood play have produced a generation of young people characterized by heightened anxiety, reduced risk tolerance, diminished capacity for managing conflict and discomfort, and historically unprecedented rates of diagnosed mental illness. Heights proposed solutions, restricting smartphone access for children under 14, banning social media for those under 16, and redesigning schools to prioritize face-to-face interaction, have been adopted in various forms by governments including the United Kingdom and Australia. The book has generated intense critical engagement, with proponents arguing that it correctly identifies an urgent crisis and skeptics arguing that the causal evidence is weaker than Haidt acknowledges. The debate itself reflects the difficulty of conducting rigorous causal research on social phenomena of this complexity and scale. The history of platform moderation and the recurring crises it has generated reveals a fundamental tension at the core of the social media enterprise, between the commercial imperative to maximize engagement and the civic imperative to maintain conditions for healthy democratic discourse. This tension has been managed on the major platforms through a series of reactive policy changes implemented in response to public scandals rather than through principled proactive design. Facebook banned political advertising in the days before the 2020 United States election, then quietly restored it. Twitter banned Alex Jones in 2018 for harassment, then, under new ownership in 2022, reinstated him. The inconsistency of these decisions reflects not hypocrisy so much as the genuine difficulty of applying consistent rules to the extraordinary diversity of human expression across the extraordinary diversity of cultures, languages, and political contexts in which the platforms operate simultaneously. No moderation policy elegant enough to be clearly stated is also precise enough to produce consistently defensible outcomes across hundreds of billions of pieces of content. The acquisition of Twitter by Elon Musk in October 2022 for approximately $44 billion and the subsequent rebranding of the platform as X represents the most dramatic and consequential restructuring of a major social media platform in the history of the industry. Musk's acquisition was accompanied by the dismissal of approximately 80% of Twitter's global workforce, the elimination of significant portions of its trust and safety team, the reinstatement of thousands of accounts that had been banned for policy violations, and a fundamental reorientation of the platform's content moderation philosophy toward what Musk described as free speech absolutism. The consequences of these decisions have been extensively documented by researchers studying platform health metrics: an increase in the prevalence of hate speech, harassment, and health misinformation, the departure of major advertising partners, and a significant reduction in both the size and the engagement rate of the platform's user base. The Musk-Twitter experiment is, among other things, a large-scale empirical test of the hypothesis that content moderation is unnecessary for a healthy social media platform. The results thus far have been instructive. The emergence of decentralized social media platforms, built on open protocols rather than proprietary corporate architectures, represents the most significant structural challenge to the surveillance capitalist model since the rise of the major platforms. Mastodon, launched in 2016 by Eugen Rochko, operates on a federated model in which independent server operators run their own instances of the platform under their own community rules, with the ability to communicate across instances through a shared open protocol called ActivityPub. Bluesky, initially incubated by Twitter and subsequently spun out as an independent organization, introduced the Authenticated Transfer Protocol as an alternative foundation for decentralized social networking. These platforms have attracted increased user interest during periods of major corporate platform disruption, particularly following Musk's acquisition of Twitter, but have so far achieved a scale that represents a small fraction of the major proprietary platforms' user bases. The decentralized model offers genuine structural resistance to the surveillance capitalist logic, but it also lacks the network effects and resource investments that have made the major platforms so difficult to displace. Generative artificial intelligence, the technology underlying systems like GPT-4, Claude, Gemini, and their successors, represents the most transformative challenge yet to the epistemic architecture of the social media environment, and the one for which existing frameworks of understanding are least adequate. Where the previous decade's concern was the amplification and spread of human-generated misinformation by algorithmic systems, the generative AI era introduces the prospect of misinformation at industrial scale, false images, fabricated audio recordings, synthetic video, and convincing textual content produced not by human bad actors requiring time and skill but by automated systems requiring only an instruction. The speed and quality with which generative AI can now produce synthetic media has already outpaced the ability of existing detection technologies to reliably identify it. This asymmetry, easy production, difficult detection, creates conditions in which the epistemic environment of social media could become, in the foreseeable future, substantially indistinguishable from the most extreme formulation of the dead internet theory's darkest predictions. The concept of synthetic media, media content generated or significantly modified by artificial intelligence systems, introduces legal, ethical, and social complications for which existing frameworks of authorship, consent, defamation, and evidence are profoundly inadequate. Deepfakes, AI-generated video or audio recordings that convincingly represent real individuals saying or doing things they never said or did, were identified as a significant threat as early as 2017, when the technology first achieved sufficient quality to be plausible to untrained observers. By 2023, deepfake technology had become sufficiently accessible that non-technical users could produce convincing synthetic media of public figures using commercially available tools. The most extensively documented harm from this technology has been the non-consensual creation of synthetic sexual imagery using real people's likenesses, a form of digital sexual abuse that has affected primarily women, including private individuals, public figures, and children. The legal response to this harm has been fragmentary, with different jurisdictions adopting different approaches and none yet achieving comprehensive and effectively enforceable protection. The economic structure of the advertising-supported social media model has produced a global surveillance infrastructure of a scale and intimacy that exceeds anything previously imagined by either the architects of Cold War surveillance states or the science fiction writers who attempted to extrapolate their logic. The data broker industry, the ecosystem of companies that buy, aggregate, package, and sell consumer behavioral data collected from social media platforms, mobile applications, loyalty programs, and digital tracking technologies, is estimated to be worth over $250 billion annually and is substantially unregulated in the United States. Data brokers maintain profiles on virtually every adult American containing hundreds of data points, purchasing history, physical location movements, health queries, relationship status, political interests, financial behavior, and inferred psychological characteristics. This data is sold to advertisers, insurance companies, employers, political campaigns, and law enforcement agencies with minimal transparency and minimal regulation. The surveillance infrastructure assembled by advertising capitalism has capabilities that would have required the resources of a nation-state intelligence agency to achieve a generation ago. The regulatory response to the harms of social media has been, in most jurisdictions, delayed, fragmented, and insufficiently equipped to address the structural nature of the problems it confronts. The European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, implemented in 2018, established the most comprehensive data privacy framework yet adopted by a major jurisdiction, introducing the concept of the right to erasure, requiring meaningful consent for data processing, and imposing potentially substantial fines for violations. The GDPR has produced real behavioral changes among the platforms operating in EU markets, including the restriction of behavioral targeting for users who have not given explicit consent, but its enforcement has been significantly hampered by the concentration of regulatory authority in Ireland, where most major American tech companies have established their European headquarters, and where the Irish Data Protection Commission has been criticized by regulatory colleagues in other EU member states for the slowness and inadequacy of its enforcement actions. China's approach to social media governance represents a dramatically different model from the regulatory frameworks of Western liberal democracies, and one that provides a sobering alternative perspective on the trade-offs involved in managing the social media environment. The Great Firewall, the censorship and content filtering infrastructure that blocks access to most Western social media platforms within China, is complemented by a domestic social media ecosystem, including platforms like Weibo, WeChat, and Douyin, the Chinese version of TikTok, that operates under conditions of extensive state surveillance and content control. Notably, the Chinese version of TikTok, Douyin, is subject to regulations that significantly limit its use by minors, including a maximum daily usage time of 40 minutes and a mandatory 10 p.m. curfew for users under 14. ByteDance, the company that owns both Douyin and TikTok, implements these restrictions domestically under regulatory compulsion while opposing equivalent restrictions in Western markets. The contrast between what ByteDance allows its Chinese and Western young users to experience has not gone unnoticed by critics of the company's public positions on child safety. The notion of the attention economy has evolved from Herbert Simon's original formulation into a considerably darker concept in the hands of critics like Tim Wu, whose 2016 book, The Attention Merchants, traces the history of institutions devoted to the capture and commercial resale of human attention from the 19th century penny press through television broadcasting to social media. Wu argues that each successive medium has achieved greater penetration of previously private cognitive and domestic space, that television entered the living room as radio had entered it before, and that social media has now penetrated the bedroom, the bathroom, and the internal monologue itself in ways that the preceding media could not. This progressive colonization of private mental space by commercial attention capture systems represents, Wu argues, a slow-moving crisis of human autonomy that has received insufficient attention precisely because it occurs incrementally, with each successive incursion establishing a new baseline that is quickly normalized. The crisis is genuinely hard to see because we are inside it, and because the tools with which we might think about it clearly are the same tools that are implicated in its production. The psychology of outrage culture on social media, the phenomenon in which public expressions of moral indignation become viral entertainment, communities form around the shared experience of disapproval, and individuals are subjected to concentrated campaigns of social punishment for perceived transgressions, has been analyzed by journalist John Ronson in his 2015 book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed, and more recently by psychologists studying the social dynamics of online punishment. The viral public shaming event, in which an individual's social transgression, often a poorly judged social media post, an ambiguous remark captured out of context, or a private behavior made public, is amplified to audiences of millions, generating consequences catastrophically disproportionate to the original offense, has become a recurring feature of the social media environment. Research suggests that participants in public shaming events are not primarily motivated by genuine moral concern but by the social rewards of in-group solidarity, the pleasurable arousal of righteous indignation, and the algorithmically reinforced visibility that comes from participating in a trending narrative. The concept of platform capitalism, the economic model in which digital platforms extract value from the interactions and data of their users while providing those users with free services in exchange, has been theorized most comprehensively by sociologist Nick Cernisek in his 2016 book, Platform Capitalism. Cernisek argues that platforms represent a novel form of economic organization that has become the dominant business model of the digital economy not because it is the most efficient at producing value but because it is the most effective at capturing and monopolizing network effects. As more users join a platform, the platform becomes more valuable to all existing users, creating a self-reinforcing dynamic that makes established platforms increasingly difficult to displace. This dynamic produces a strong tendency toward monopoly concentration, explaining the remarkable convergence of the global social media landscape into a small number of dominant players. The network effect is also the reason why users continue to use platforms they explicitly dislike. Because the social cost of leaving, the loss of connections to the people who remain, typically exceeds whatever dissatisfaction motivates departure. The history of social media's relationship with mental health has been complicated by a systematic asymmetry between the speed of the industry's growth and the speed of the scientific community's capacity to study its consequences rigorously. The gold standard of causal inference in psychology, the randomized controlled trial, in which participants are randomly assigned to experimental and control conditions, is extraordinarily difficult to implement for studies of social media use, because randomly assigning people to be heavy social media users or abstainers over meaningful time periods raises both ethical and practical objections. The studies that are feasible, cross-sectional surveys, longitudinal observational studies, and short-term experimental interventions each have significant methodological limitations that make causal conclusions provisional. The result is that the scientific debate about social media's mental health effects has proceeded in a state of permanent uncertainty that the industry has exploited to resist regulatory action, while the scale and urgency of the phenomenon being studied far exceeds the regulatory threshold that the available evidence base can definitively establish. The neuroscience of social pain, the physiological basis for the experience of social rejection and exclusion, provides a particularly disturbing lens through which to understand the psychological stakes of social media engagement. Research by psychologist Naomi Eisenberger at UCLA, using functional MRI brain imaging, demonstrated in a landmark 2003 study that the experience of social exclusion activates the same neural substrates as physical pain, specifically, the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insula, regions associated with the affective component of physical pain rather than its sensory localization. This finding that social pain is not merely analogous to physical pain but neurologically identical to it suggests that the experience of social rejection on social media, the noticed absence of likes on a post, the observation that a social event occurred without one's inclusion, the public experience of being blocked or unfollowed, activates genuine pain circuits in the brain. The platforms, in other words, have created an environment in which social pain is both more frequent and more immediately available as an experience than any previous social environment in human evolutionary history. The architecture of social comparison on Instagram has been studied with particular rigor in the context of body image, with the concept of fitspiration and thinspiration content serving as an extreme expression of a broader dynamic affecting users across the platform's demographic range. A 2018 study published in Body Image found that exposure to idealized body images on social media was associated with increased body dissatisfaction, regardless of whether the images were identified as digitally altered, and that this effect was stronger for images encountered in the social media context than for the same images encountered in traditional media. The mechanism appears to involve the specific social comparison architecture of Instagram, in which aspirational images are interspersed with content from people in one's actual social network, creating a continuous oscillation between upward social comparison with idealized strangers and lateral social comparison with known acquaintances, both generating distinct but compounding forms of self-evaluative anxiety. The eating disorder Charity Beat has documented a direct relationship between social media use and the frequency with which young people report eating disorder symptom onset and relapse. The economic inequality of the creator economy, the vast disparity between the rewards captured by the small number of creators who achieve viral success and the majority who labor in relative obscurity despite significant effort and skill, follows a statistical distribution known as a power law or Pareto distribution, in which a small fraction of participants capture an overwhelming proportion of total resources. Analysis of YouTube monetization data has consistently shown that the top 1% of channels capture more than 90% of total advertising revenue. On Spotify, the top 1% of artists account for approximately 90% of all streams. This extreme concentration of reward is not an anomaly but a structural feature of attention economies operating at internet scale, in which network effects, algorithmic amplification, and the human tendency toward herding behavior all systematically concentrate attention on already popular content, making the most popular content progressively more popular while the vast majority of content receives proportionally less and less attention over time. The history of social media's regulatory engagement with antitrust law represents one of the most consequential unresolved legal debates of the early 21st century. The Federal Trade Commission's antitrust lawsuit against Facebook, filed in December 2020, argued that the company had maintained its monopoly position in personal social networking through an illegal acquire or bury strategy, systematically acquiring potential competitors like Instagram and WhatsApp and blocking smaller platforms from accessing the Facebook API when they showed signs of competitive threat. The core legal question the case raises is whether the acquisitions, individually justifiable under the antitrust frameworks available at the time of their consummation, constitute, in aggregate, an illegal pattern of monopolization. The case reflects a broader recognition by regulators that the analytical frameworks developed for industrial-era antitrust, which focused primarily on price effects in markets with tangible goods, are structurally inadequate for analyzing competition in markets where the product is free, the commodity is attention, and the barriers to competition are primarily the network effects accumulated through scale. The future of digital identity is being shaped by two competing technological and political visions that are, at this moment, in direct and consequential conflict. The first vision, associated with the major existing platforms and with the surveillance capitalist model they embody, envisions digital identity as an asset owned and managed by platforms, a profile that users inhabit but do not control, subject to the terms of service of the platform that hosts it and the algorithmic systems that mediate its expression. The second vision, associated with the blockchain ecosystem, decentralized web advocates, and movements for digital rights, envisions a future of self-sovereign identity, in which individuals own their digital identities as a form of portable, cryptographically secured personal property that they can carry across platforms, share selectively, and revoke from any service that violates the terms of the user's consent. The conflict between these visions is not merely technical. It is a conflict over the fundamental question of whether the digital self belongs to the person who inhabits it or to the commercial infrastructure that hosts it. The metaverse, the vision of a persistent, immersive, spatially organized digital social environment in which users interact through embodied avatars, was most influentially articulated in Neal Stephenson's 1992 science fiction novel, Snow Crash, and has been pursued as a commercial proposition most ambitiously by Meta, which rebranded from Facebook specifically to signal its commitment to this vision in October 2021. The metaverse represents the logical extension of social media's trajectory. Where the current social media environment captures two-dimensional attention through screens, the metaverse aspires to capture three-dimensional presence through spatial computing. The psychological implications of this extension are significant. Immersive virtual environments activate presence, the subjective sense of being in a place, to a degree that two-dimensional screens cannot, and the social dynamics of embodied virtual environments are known from gaming research to be psychologically more intense, more emotionally engaging, and more consequential for real-world social attitudes and behaviors than the interactions of conventional social media. The surveillance and behavioral data collection capabilities of immersive virtual environments also vastly exceed those of two-dimensional platforms. The concept of digital wellness, the emerging field concerned with the psychological health implications of digital technology use and the design of healthier digital environments, has produced a range of interventions, from individual behavioral practices like digital detoxes and screen time limits to structural design proposals for platforms themselves. Tristan Harris, the former Google design ethicist who has become the most prominent public advocate for humane technology design, has argued through the Center for Humane Technology that individual behavioral interventions are insufficient and that the only adequate response to the harms of addictive platform design is the redesign of the platforms themselves, guided by regulatory requirements rather than voluntary industry action. Harris's critique focuses on what he calls the extractive attention model, the design logic that treats user attention as a resource to be maximized, and proposes replacing it with a regenerative model in which platform design is evaluated according to its effects on user well-being, democratic discourse, and social cohesion rather than time on platform alone. The role of social media in the spread and organization of social movements represents one of the technology's most genuinely positive and most genuinely complicated contributions to public life. The Arab Spring uprisings of 2010 to 2012, which involved the coordinated use of Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube for movement organization and international visibility in Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, and Syria, were initially celebrated as evidence that social media had democratized the tools of political organizing and made authoritarian suppression of dissent more difficult. The subsequent history of those uprisings, the restoration of authoritarian rule in Egypt, the descent of Libya and Syria into prolonged civil conflicts, complicated the initial optimism significantly. Research by political scientists including Zeynep Tufekci, whose 2017 book, Twitter and Tear Gas, remains the most rigorous analysis of this question, suggests that social media-enabled movements are characterized by a paradox. They can mobilize large numbers of participants rapidly and without the traditional organizational infrastructure. But this ease of mobilization also means that movements lack the organizational resilience, strategic capacity, and internal decision-making structures that historically sustained movements through adversity. The Black Lives Matter movement's use of social media, particularly Twitter and Instagram, in the period following the police killing of George Floyd in May 2020 demonstrates both the extraordinary mobilizing power of social media and the specific limitations that Tufekci's analysis identified. The hashtag Black Lives Matter had been created in 2013 by Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tometi in response to the acquittal of George Zimmerman in the killing of Trayvon Martin. Over the following 7 years, it circulated on social media as a persistent signal of movement identity before the Floyd killing catalyzed its explosive amplification. In the 10 days following Floyd's death, the hashtag was used approximately 47 million times on Twitter alone. The protests that followed were the largest in United States history by most estimates. The mobilization capacity demonstrated by social media in this period was extraordinary. Yet the movement also demonstrated the organizational vulnerabilities that social media creates. Leaderless and structurally horizontal, it was both difficult for authorities to suppress and difficult for participants to channel into sustained legislative outcomes. The permanent structural changes that its scale seemed, in the summer of 2020, to make imaginable. The concept of algorithmic accountability, the demand that the automated systems making consequential decisions about content visibility, platform access, and information distribution be subject to meaningful transparency, independent audit, and democratic oversight, has emerged as the central demand of the platform regulation movement. In 2022, the European Union's Digital Services Act established, for the first time in any major jurisdiction, a legal framework requiring the largest online platforms to provide independent researchers with access to their data and algorithmic systems for purposes of public interest research. The DSA also requires platforms to provide users with at least one chronological, non-personalized feed option, a requirement that acknowledges the fundamentally political nature of algorithmic curation and attempts to restore some degree of individual epistemic autonomy. These provisions represent the most significant attempt yet by a democratic government to open the black box of platform algorithms to public scrutiny, though their implementation and enforcement remain ongoing. The psychological concept of technofrence, the interference that digital device use creates in face-to-face social relationships, was introduced by Brandon McDaniel and Sarah Coyne in a 2016 paper and has since been studied extensively in the context of parenting, romantic partnership, and friendship. Research using experience sampling methods, in which participants report on their in-the-moment experiences throughout the day, has found that the mere presence of a smartphone on a table during a conversation, even if it is face down and not touched by either party, is sufficient to significantly reduce the quality of the conversation as reported by both participants, and to reduce feelings of closeness, connection, and trust between them. This iPhone effect, as it has been called in subsequent research, suggests that the social costs of smartphone and social media ubiquity operate through mechanisms of diminished attention that occur even when the device is not actively used. That the cognitive availability of the device to which one is trained to attend compulsively degrades the quality of presence in face-to-face interaction in ways that are invisible to both parties. The history of privacy law has been fundamentally destabilized by the emergence of social media and the surveillance infrastructure it has generated, exposing the limits of legal frameworks developed in an era when private information was scarce, difficult to collect, and difficult to disseminate. The foundational American legal concept of a reasonable expectation of privacy, established in the 1967 Supreme Court case Katz v. United States, requires courts to evaluate whether a person has a subjective expectation of privacy in a given context and whether that expectation is one that society recognizes as reasonable. In the social media era, this framework has produced increasingly strained reasoning, as courts have been required to determine whether people who voluntarily share information with social media platforms retain any expectation of privacy against government surveillance of those same platforms, and whether the aggregation of individually public data points, each shared voluntarily and separately, constitutes a privacy violation when assembled into a comprehensive behavioral profile. The doctrine of third-party doctrine in American constitutional law. The principle, established in Smith v. Maryland, 1979, and related cases, that information voluntarily shared with a third party carries no Fourth Amendment protection, has been identified by civil liberties scholars as the most significant doctrinal obstacle to legal protection of digital privacy in the surveillance capitalism era. Under the third-party doctrine, the behavioral data that users generate on social media platforms, having been voluntarily shared with those platforms, is available to government surveillance without a warrant. The Supreme Court's 2018 decision in Carpenter v. United States, which held that the third-party doctrine did not extend to cell phone location data collected over extended periods, suggested a potential doctrinal evolution. But the broader question of whether the vast behavioral profiles assembled by social media platforms about their users constitute a form of data to which constitutional privacy protections should attach remains unresolved, and its resolution will have consequences extending well beyond social media into the future architecture of digital life. The economic model of data brokerage, the purchasing, aggregation, enhancement, and resale of consumer behavioral data, operates largely invisibly to the individuals whose data is being traded and largely unregulated by the jurisdictions in which it occurs, particularly in the United States where no comprehensive federal data privacy law yet exists. Data brokers maintain files on virtually every adult American, containing information sourced from social media activity, credit card transactions, loyalty program memberships, public records, voter registration databases, and location data purchased from mobile applications. This information is assembled into profiles sold to a diverse range of clients including advertisers, insurance companies, employers conducting background investigations, political campaigns, and with increasing frequency, law enforcement agencies seeking to build profiles of individuals of interest without the oversight requirements that would attend formal surveillance warrants. The commercial surveillance apparatus that social media has helped construct is, in functional terms, a privatized panopticon, a system of comprehensive behavioral observation that operates continuously, invisibly, and largely beyond the reach of any legal framework designed to protect the individuals it observes. The philosophical question that underlies all of the empirical, legal, and regulatory debates about social media is ultimately a question about human agency. Whether the behavioral patterns produced by social media use represent the freely chosen expressions of autonomous human beings exercising their preferences, or whether they represent responses to an environment so precisely engineered for compulsion that the language of free choice is insufficient to describe them. The platforms and their defenders have consistently argued for the former interpretation, that users are free to use or not use the products, that engagement reflects genuine preferences, and that characterizing algorithmic design as manipulation is paternalistic. Their critics have argued that the neuroscience of dopamine, variable ratio reinforcement, and social pain, combined with the engineered design of infinite scroll, notification systems, and algorithmic recommendation, creates an environment in which the ordinary psychological concept of free choice cannot straightforwardly apply. This debate is not merely academic. Its resolution will determine whether the social media environment is understood as a domain requiring the kind of consumer protection and product safety regulation applied to other products that can cause harm, or as a space of expression in which the market and individual choice are the appropriate and sufficient regulators. The emerging field of computational propaganda, the use of automated systems, data analytics, and artificial intelligence to influence political attitudes and behaviors at scale, represents the convergence of surveillance capitalism's data infrastructure with the long-standing tradition of political persuasion, producing capabilities that exceed, both quantitatively and qualitatively, anything that previous generations of political communicators could have imagined. Samuel Woolley and Philip Howard at the Oxford Internet Institute have documented the systematic use of computational propaganda techniques by political actors in dozens of countries across the political spectrum, identifying a global industry of political bot operation, fake account networks, and targeted disinformation distribution that has become a standard feature of both domestic electoral competition and international information warfare. The capabilities this technology provides, the ability to identify psychologically susceptible individuals with extraordinary precision, target them with content specifically calibrated to their vulnerabilities, and do so at a scale and speed that leaves no trace visible to the targeted individual, represent a fundamental challenge to the conditions required for informed democratic participation. The concept of digital sovereignty, the aspiration of individuals, communities, and nations to meaningful control over their digital environments, data, and infrastructure, has emerged as a central political demand in response to the dominance of American and Chinese technology platforms over global digital life. The European Union's digital strategy, articulated in a series of legislative initiatives including the GDPR, the Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act, and the proposed AI Act, reflects a coherent ambition to establish European digital sovereignty, to ensure that the digital lives of European citizens are governed by European values and European law rather than by the terms of service of American corporations or the national security interests of the United States government. India's data localization requirements, Brazil's Lei Geral de Proteção de Dados, and the data governance frameworks being developed across the Global South all reflect a growing global recognition that digital sovereignty is not merely a technical question but a political one, a question about who has the power to shape the informational environment in which human agency is exercised. The long-term historical significance of the social media era, the period from approximately 1997 to the present, is most clearly seen when it is placed in the context of the longer history of communication technology and its social consequences. The printing press, introduced to Europe by Gutenberg in approximately 1440, disrupted the Catholic Church's monopoly on the production and interpretation of religious texts, enabling the Protestant Reformation and a century of religious warfare, while simultaneously creating the conditions for the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. The telegraph, the telephone, and the broadcast media of radio and television each produced comparable disruptions to existing social orders, epistemic frameworks, and power distributions, with consequences that took decades or centuries to fully manifest. Social media, which has compressed the timeline of its disruptions to years rather than decades, represents the latest and most rapid of these communication revolutions. Its long-term consequences, for democracy, for human cognition, for social trust, for the nature of identity and community, are still being negotiated, contested, and constructed. The story that Midnight Molecules has been tracing across these 100 facts is not yet finished. It has, in the deepest sense, only just begun.